We're moving on to the next keynote, and this sort of ties in the coaching journey. The session is going to be delivered by Ulster GAA's Coach Education Manager, Roger Keenan. Roger's worked for the Provincial Council in his role for, must be about 12 years now, Roger. He is a tutor, coach developer, and has coached at club and county level in Tyrone and perhaps other counties and beyond that. So I'd ask you to please welcome Roger Keenan.
Okay, just welcome everybody. Good morning and lovely sharp morning here in Killyclougher. So really just building on what Eugene has gone through, really what my role here today is to look at how we align the coach development pathway with the player pathway. You've seen the FTEM model, and obviously that has given us an opportunity to relook and to refocus on coach education and how we can complement that player development model. So you should all be pretty familiar with this model. This is the structure of coach education that we have been using probably over the last 10 to 12 years. It has served us well. Obviously, what you're looking at there are the National Governing Body Awards, the key building blocks of foundation, safeguarding, child protection, and then coaches focusing on one of the three streams, either youth, or adult. And in between that, the very important thing is these may be the building blocks, but the cement between those blocks are all of the different programs that we deliver in terms of participation, CTPs, performance, and high performance, and all the various conferences and inputs that we tend to deliver. Okay, so just I suppose the FTEM model has provided that opportunity, along with the pandemic as well, to really take time and do a lot of the work that we would have liked to have done over the last 5 or 6 years in terms of coach education. So we talked about the player pathway right from, they leave their parents basically, or as a 4 and 5 year old baby, and they're going to their first training session with the club, and somebody takes them by the hand and basically takes them that first training session. Even at that stage, a lot of the values have been formed. But we want to make sure that all the coaches that interact with those players along this pathway, whether it's the F1 or the F2, whether it's the club, whether it's into the elite bit, that they make the best possible impression on those players as they move along that pathway. And I think it's important maybe that we don't overemphasize the T1, the T2, that talented and elite area, because we have to remember that 80%, maybe more, maybe 90% of our players never go on to the talented area and stay with their clubs and focus on their clubs. And that's probably why that club circle, the big blue circle in the centre, is one of the biggest ones in it. So I think that's important to remember. And even the players who go on to F1 and go on to T1 and T2, that talented identification area, a lot of them come back to clubs. So we want to make sure that they come back better players, better individuals, and making a better input into their clubs. So that's important. And again, just stressing that the three pillars that Eugene referenced, as in the player, the game, and the environment, are still equally important. So just a wee bit, we'll maybe develop a wee bit of these, and they're slightly different from a coaching perspective, I think, than they are necessarily from the player perspective. So we talk about the things that the players being passionate, committed, and inquisitive, and respect for all, the resilience bit, and being responsible. I think that is all very, very important, obviously, from the player, and that's what makes the player a better person. And I suppose those skills and attributes are transferable to whatever walk of life they're in, but also the coach's responsibility, as you can imagine, for the tactical, the team play, the systems of play, whether they're a team player and all of that. So there's lots of other aspects in there for the coach as well. In terms of the game, and we talk about the game being the centre of nearly everything we do, and the coach should have the game at the centre, and that's very good, and it's great to hear all of that. But the coach needs to know why they're playing the game. What is the reason for the game that is focused on the needs of the team or the needs of the player, and obviously that is challenging, that it looks like a game, that very much has a player at the centre, that there's lots of constant decision making, and that all players are involved. So those things are important. But we don't want coaches either that hide behind games and say, well, sure, I'm playing the game and that's good. You need to have a real focus on that game. The environment, and Eugene referenced earlier on the ecosystem and the environment for the player, with the parents, their peers, the schools, and all of the things that's going on. But the environment that they need create and provide has to be challenging, supportive, accountable. It has to promote team cohesion. It has to be inclusive, competitive. It has to be non-threatening, where mistakes are not a bad thing. Mistakes are just part of the process of learning, and that they need to promote leadership and be respectful. And there's a lot of other stuff in there that we'd also like to see. So we talk about player pathways, and we have one up here of the Sean Kavanagh journey, and I know we're going to be talking to Colin Kavanagh and Michael Murphy and others later on as well. And very much their pathway is very much the ideal pathway. Probably top players excelled in the sport right from the word go, but as individuals and as players, and move seamlessly through the system. But I just make the point again that isn't the case for everybody. Some people never go to the talented area. Some people stay with their clubs. Some people develop late. Ambrose Rogers was referenced there earlier on, and I'm sure there's lots of others like Ricey McMenamin and Conor Gormley, people like that didn't maybe play for their county minors or involved in academies who came through late. Some people are very early developers and don't progress through the system. So as coaches, we need to be aware of that, and that's all part of getting to know our players and their journey and their particular things that maybe they're dealing with in their lives as well. So just in terms of starting to think about how we would map our coaches to the FTEM model or the player development model, by and large, we would say that, it's not always, coaches don't always move through the system. Some stay and some move through the system. A lot of coaches will come with their children, do their foundation, do their basic qualifications, and maybe if the children just drop off, they will drop off as well. So that's probably a big issue with our current system, that we would be aware that for every 100 people that come through foundation level, that maybe only 20 would go on to do level 1 and continue to engage with coach education. And that is an issue that we, I think, have to address. And we'll cover that as we go through this. But I think we're making the point that that's where a lot of the programs and a lot of the coaches sit in terms of nursery, child. Some will specialise in that area. Some will just coach in their clubs and possibly access level 1 or the team management programs, and a lot of the programs that we are delivering and rolling out, and the various CDPs that we reference, participation, performance level and high performance level. Some will want to move through. And a lot of these people who move into the T1 and T4 areas are probably very often schools coaches as well, that are dealing, and just interestingly listening to John McElhone there earlier, how elite the school system is. And we're not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that, as long as it's not been repeated as well by the development squads, and we're not doing everything twice. And I think that's a point that we have to bring across. So it's not a seamless system, and it's not an exact science. And some coaches move through the system and some stay. Okay, so the other tier, we talked about the player development, and we're talking about the coach development pathways. But for those to come together, there has to be, it's absolutely crucial that there is a comprehensive games plan in place, and that's constantly changing, and it needs to be constantly changing, the same as we have to change our coach development pathway. That those playing opportunities now, even at the moment of the split season, with the uneven age groups at underage level and academies, that constantly needs to be changing. So we must be continually to provide a comprehensive program of games opportunities. And you can see where some of those games opportunities sit, right from Go games at the earlier stages, F1, F2, coming to Bond School, the work that they do in the primary schools, the earlier club blitzes at all the blitzes goes on at club, even from under 8 and under 10. Maybe some of them shouldn't actually be happening, or don't know whether it's all within rule or not, but they do happen. Moving into the club, all the club fixtures that happen, the stuff that we provide in terms of FILA, OG Sport, TAN leagues, all of that stuff, right through then to the work that Tony is doing at academy level, and Kevin Kelly, and all the various opportunities for games and for competition that is there. So it has to be a meaningful, progressive competition structure that ties the player development pathway and the coach development pathway together. Just getting a wee bit of an idea in our heads of how we would like the coach development pathway to look. It might be a bit high on formal delivery at the beginning, at the Introduction to Gaelic Games course, or the foundation course as we know it, that is fairly formal, maybe classroom based, although we're trying all the time to make that more practical, to make that more interactive, to make it more meaningful. But as coaches move up through the system, that there's so much different choice, and they start to reflect on what their needs are and plot their own journey, that maybe they're not strong in communication, maybe they're not strong in technical work, and they need to access a workshop either for tactical, for sports psychology, for building resilience, whatever it might be, that those coaches start to reflect on where their pathway leads them, and that we are able to provide enough opportunity for them to dip in and out of various coaching opportunities and interventions for them to eventually build those credits and get to the next level. So we obviously need a very flexible system. So the whole thing about mentoring, communities of practice, reflective practice is so crucial. Now, this also will involve a probably massive retraining and upskilling of our current coach developers, or training of coach developers right from national level down. Okay, so that looks like a very cluttered slide, and it is a very cluttered slide because that's the way it is. And it's just to give you the impression of, if we start to populate all the various coach education interventions and opportunities for our coaches in terms of doing core modules, of doing optional modules, of how they accumulate credits, and of how to progress and how flexible it needs to be. Blended learning, obviously the pandemic has given us a great push in terms of how we deliver through webinars, through blended learning, through online learning. But we also know that there is still that need for face-to-face, that practical element, which we can never, I think, get to a stage where we can do without. So these are all sort of ways of coaches reaching the levels that they need to reach. And obviously the whole credit accumulation thing is, which we'll just maybe talk about as well. So we talked a lot about reflective coaching. Eugene referenced it. What does that really mean? So I'm going to give you an idea. For example, Tony at the moment is running out a performance coaching program for our academy coaches. So they come on that, initially come on that particular program. They start looking at where they are as coaches, and they start maybe checking themselves against communication, against technical ability, against all what we would feel are the key indicators for coaching. And they start saying, well, listen, I think one of our needs is, say, for example, around communication. We don't really have clarity in our language, and we're not getting our point across as well as we'd like. So we would bring in, say, Pat Gilroy, for example, to deliver a webinar around that whole clarity of language, communicating with players. And I think an issue he raised, like, if you say to a player, for example, I need you to get stuck in, what does that actually mean to the player? What is that? What picture has he got or her got in his or her head as regards what that means? So the whole idea around clarity of language and how we communicate with players, and we're running out that course at the minute, and I think it's absolutely fantastic because it's based on the needs of the coach. It's not a broad brush approach. It is a focused approach on their needs, and as well as that, on that particular program, we are broken into groups of 5, which some people might call mentoring, but I would say it's actually maybe more action learning, where we have 5 people in a group. They all come with a particular issue that they're struggling with, and it's circulated in advance. And then the 5 people try to give their solutions from their experience to that problem. So this whole idea of reflective coaching, we do talk about being a developmental coach, about learning discovery. We need to, if we're looking for that from our players, we need to understand what that means for us as coaches. So I suppose the vision, so we're working on this at the moment. There's a number of groups in Croke Park or national level work on this whole revamp of coach education, and it's about aligning those 3 pillars: the player development pathway, as in the FTEM model, how we map the coach development pathway to make that experience the best possible experience for them, and how that must be glued together by a comprehensive fixtures program. And that needs constant changing. And obviously with the split season, pandemic and all the rest, that is forever changing at the moment. So a learning environment that provides a menu of choice and flexibility, so that the coaches have choice. If we're going to ask the coach to reflect on what their needs are, then we've got to provide the choice and flexibility for them to learn. A program that promotes self-reflection, and we just talked about a couple of our programs, that Ulster GAA Academy program, as well as our club support program, where we're going into clubs, we're sitting them down, we're asking them what's working well in your club in terms of coaching structures, what needs changing, and then looking at action plans and a time and when they can be delivered and who is going to deliver them. the facilitation of county service providers, so right to the very top in terms of our physios or medical people or strength and conditioning people or athletic development people or trainers at the top level, inter-county level, coming together in groups to share practice and look at what their issues are, and then us looking at how maybe we can bring in, whether it's the expertise from ourselves or from outside or the Sports Institute to solve some of those issues. Now, the big issue around this is going to be how we recognise and reward, active coaching, because we know that we have some top coaches out there at inter-county level, at the top level, who haven't necessarily engaged with our structures and our systems. And part of that is possibly because they don't have time. When you're delivering level ones, it takes 2 or 3 weekends, or level twos, maybe taking 4 weekends, maybe they don't have time. So we have to find a way maybe of verifying and certifying those people who are out there actively coaching at a high level. And obviously we want people to continue to engage with the coach education, that they don't do a foundation, disappear for the next 5 years and come back with their hand up saying, no, I'm a coach. So there has to be some type of continual engagement. So I suppose the challenges, and we've probably covered some of those challenges as we've gone through. We've got to agree our core modules, and we've groups already looking at what the core modules might be, possibly around communications, role of the coach, stuff like that. We then have to agree a menu of optional learning opportunities. And I'm doing a wee bit of work on that at the minute, and I'm looking at all of the different resources, materials, courses in the 4 provinces, and it is massive amount of stuff. And where they map and fit in the FTEM model, a lot of them are very similar, and they're called different names. There's one name for the same thing in Leinster as we're doing in Ulster, so a lot of that has to be looked at. Bringing learning opportunities to coaching population. Normally we bring people to Skirvahi or Owenbeg, or bringing them to Armagh, travel maybe 50 miles or an hour's journey to attend a course. How can that be more mobile? And I suppose the pandemic has maybe solved that to some extent for us. How we reward active coaching, as we said in the last slide. Observe and certify those coaches at the top level. How we capture and certify that learning and get us certified. We know that we struggle at the moment with a very linear system to have all our databases up to date. So this is going to be a challenge of how we do that. We may well have coaches who have a unique learning number, and every time they attend a workshop, whatever, they get a credit for that, and that goes against their unique learning number. But there's a lot of work, obviously, to do on that. Constant engagement and refresher with coach education, and the massive work to be done and upskilling our coach developers, trainers, mentors, and coach admin. And we've probably put people on here who are coach developers and wonder what's been happening. It's always been very quiet. So we are working on all of that stuff, and we would hope sometime in February or early in the year that we will talk to our coach developers and give them an idea of where we are, what's happening, and what's likely to happen. And obviously the elephant in the room, as always, tends to be the budget. Who's going to pay for this and all of that? But we're assured that national level are committed to this and that it can happen. So I suppose that is a very quick run through, and it leads us into the questions and answers. Probably if I missed anything, maybe at this stage, if Eugene could jump in, if there's anything that he wants to mention or wants clarified.
Thanks, Roger. No, I think it dovetailed into what I was trying to get across. Different comments and a few bits and pieces that are coming in through the chat bar. And again, I'm very happy to take the questions through the chat bar. Maybe, I suppose, just to start off with, Roger, I suppose in our experience, some coaches are scared of maybe doing different things with their teams. So, for example, the whole area of athletic development. If I was supposed to ask you the question, if a team doesn't have the resources to bring in someone to do athletic development, what can coaches themselves do to probably enhance athletic development?
But I think, Eugene, probably it's an area that coaches are scared of, and a lot of it's to do with, maybe there's some brilliant people out there in that whole discipline of S&C, but some people make it maybe more difficult than it seems. So to me, I think we're very close to this in Ulster GAA, should very soon be releasing, the course that we have written up in terms of what you do in athletic development at the fundamental stage, the learn to train stage, the compete stage, and all of that, so that we make it simple, that it's good movement technique, that it is not rocket science, and we try to take this fear factor out of it. Because it doesn't have to be something that we should fear, and we should be creating sort of a non-threatening environment around that whole area of athletic development.
I suppose I think was Aaron alluded earlier to the Activate warm-up. What role has that got to play in terms of us as coaches working with our teams?
Well, I personally think that the Activate warm-up has been the single biggest influence for me and my coaching and the reduction of injuries. If you do it constantly, if you do it religiously, if you change it up, yes, it can be, you can make it much more flexible and much more ball on it. But if you retain those good techniques, that cut to plant and cut, that slowing down to speed up, all of that one-legged strength, all of that stuff done constantly on a regular basis is good. We've a wee bit of a philosophy in coaching for the last while that every session has to be singing and dancing. Every session has to be different. Variety is great, yes, but you only get good at things. You only improve if you keep doing the same things on a regular basis as well.
Yeah, just a comment here from Larkin McCrory. Just one shop stop, I suppose, for club coaches to access info would be of great benefit. So that's something I think that might be useful as well to take on board. Well, the other thing you talked about was the game and the need for a regular program of games. Like what issues have you seen over the last few years in terms of providing a consistent games program for players?
The two big things usually that jump out for me is that in some counties, and maybe your own county, and it's improved, I'd have to say, dramatically this last 2 years, but we did have an issue where we're squeezing competitions into 6 to 8 weeks or maybe 12 weeks maximum. And if you were knocked out in the first round of the championship at minor level, for example, that was your season over after maybe 2 or 3 league games. Now, that is not what I would call a comprehensive programme of games. And, there's a danger then you're going to lose those players who are probably twiddling their thumbs for the next 8-10 months of the year. So that's one thing. The other thing is knowing in advance that you have a clear programme of fixtures, when they're going to happen, so that families, players can plan their lives around that. Those are the two things for me that stick out.
Do you think there's a need to take down the county borders? For competition. And what I mean by that is, if say in Derry here we have 2 or 3 grades, A, B, and C, for the small and the medium and the big size clubs, and the small clubs, maybe 4 or 5 teams in the league, so they're constantly playing each other. Is there not potential there, do you think, for ourselves, say a small club like my own club here, maybe playing into East Tyrone or something like that to develop leagues that are a wee bit more flexible?
Absolutely. Usually we should be providing a really flexible menu. Now, it wouldn't be a broad brush approach and it may not suit everybody, but there may be a number of very small clubs that maybe can only field 7 or 8 in a particular age group. And there just isn't enough similar clubs within the county boundaries to do that. There's nothing wrong with thinking outside the box, as long as it's a focused thought process, that it doesn't suddenly decide this is for everybody. It may not be for everybody.
Okay. Just a quick question from Johnny there. Is there a pathway for goalkeepers?
Is there a pathway for goalkeepers? I would say, Johnny, there probably isn't, but I would say that there should be. And, we have had for a long time that we just treat goalkeepers as just another player, and that's completely wrong. And to be honest, it is changing quite a bit at the minute. And I'd say we might not be that far away from a pathway from goalkeepers. But yes, it's something that needs to happen, and it's a different pathway from the outfield player pathway.
I just see Paul Callahan responding there. Johnny, we have a goalkeeping workshop. We have goalkeeping workshops, no official course yet, but we hope to progress this soon. So that's something I can see that Paul is working on. Just a question from Seamus Durkin here. Reflecting on my current coaching approach to our very young in the club, currently have a dual club with a nursery for under 6s, starting with 30 minutes fundamentals, then with 30 minutes for each code. That's 1.5 hours once a week. Would it be better to have 2 slots an hour a week for each code, fundamentals with code-specific training allocated to each code? So any comments on that? Do you train the kids together at under 6s, or do you split them?
To be honest with you, at that age, I think that's brilliant. I think the more sport they're playing, the more codes they're playing at that age, and the more movement patterns that they're picking up, the better. And surely it can only be good for both sports to have them integrated. Okay,
thanks for that. Chris, for a club committee hired managers, this coach education strategy could filter out a lot of cowboys. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris.
There's a lot of journeymen about. There's probably some of them on this conference, God knows.
I'll behave. present company excluded.
But the whole thing, I suppose that's another argument. This thing, journeymen are cowboys. There's some good cowboys, and there's some maybe not so good.
Oh dear. Just a question here from Jared O'Connor. Jared, you're welcome this morning. Just well done, Roger. What's fundamentally different in the pathway, and what does it mean for coaches?
What's different in this pathway? I suppose what's fundamentally different in this pathway is that there's a greater choice, greater flexibility. We're moving more towards the coach in the club than bringing them to us. I think it's a more reflective program, and it gives I suppose, as I said already, it gives greater choice for the coaches.
Yeah, and I suppose it allows the objective is to allow coaches to tap in a more flexible manner.
Yes.
And that, I suppose, learning is a continuous process. It's not do a course and then disappear. I suppose that's where maybe go back to the chat bar here. That was one of the questions I maybe had for you. You know, we tend to have these huge numbers at foundation level or introductory award, and then there's a very sharp narrowing of the triangle at level 1, and then definitely at level 2. You know, how can we encourage our coaches to stay involved in the coach education process?
I think Eugene, that we have a lot of people after foundation. We obviously have some who just come on, get foundation, work with their kids, and probably stop coaching. But we have another group that take coaching very, very seriously and get very, very busy coaching and are out 2 or 3 nights a week and maybe go right through to the top level. So I think we have to have a flexible enough program that somehow or other captures the active coaching they're doing and checks the competencies that those have and reward them for that.
Just from Michael here, moving Taylor from under 15, was that an impact on player development, do you think?
I don't really think so. I think it's just another playing opportunity. It's another competition. All playing opportunities are good as long as they don't overlap too much and become, an issue with player burnout and playing too many games and all of the issues around that.
Yeah. Some good comments coming in here. I'm leaving some of them for people to read on their own if you're scrolling down through the chat bar. One from Dylan here, following up on the multi-sports approach. What age would you recommend sports specification? As stated by many sports benefit a player's development. So basically, the more sports kids play, it benefits their development. So where do we need to become specific?
Well, somebody asked Island Bally that question one time, and I think his answer was around about the age of 16. He says one ass can only ride one horse. So it depends on the sport. Obviously, it depends on a lot of things. But I think I suppose that's right. The more sports, early specialization for our sport isn't necessarily good. The more sports, more codes, the more interaction you have with sports in the early years, the better. But at 15, 16, I think most of the experts were saying for our type of sport, field sport, you might need to be focusing on that.
Okay, we're going over 4 minutes, Roger. So I need to be cracking down here.
Okay.
Just from Niall, great presentation, Roger. What would you see a community of practice? What would you see a community of practice working in a club, or how would you see a community of practice working in a club? If you're going to do it in Gorton, Roger, what's the steps?
Well, I suppose what we're doing in terms of the club support program is communities to practice, and we're bringing all the coaching fraternity together. We're breaking them up into breakout rooms. They are looking at what's going well in their club, what's not going so well, and then we're trying to break that down into actions, short-term actions, long-term actions. It could be more specific in that in the club. It might be just bringing people together who are working at a particular age group, whether it be nursery, whether it be early underage years, youth level or adult level, and actually having a focus on that night of the community practice. What are we focusing on? What are the issues? And let's tease these issues out. It's a bit like that action learning thing that we're doing on Tony's program, the academy program, that people bring their 5 issues with them, and the other 5 people throw in their tuppence worth of how they could solve it from those, and where you get good experienced people on a course, and you can facilitate the right environment. It's fantastic what can happen in those sorts of community of practice. It really is.